There's a quote said in the film that actually moved me, and it was actually one of the characters who had said this in your film, one of the people who said this in your film. The development of a community was arrested. Not just the development of people, but the development of community, but even further, the development of children, right? The mind, and even asking that question just now, who failed you? It calls forth for something, again, that we've been discussing. A theme is accountability.
Right.
And realizing that we all have a role to play in this.
Right.
Who's willing to step up?
Right.
And who's willing to be a mirror? You know, how can we really look forth and break down these narratives for the healing of our community?
Oh, that's so beautiful,
You know?
Chardonnay.
Thank you.
That is so beautiful. And that's Tanya Wilson who said that.
Wow.
And Tanya Wilson was in my class at Evergreen. And she was very smart.
Tanya Wilson said the quote about the development of the rest of the community.
Yeah, right. Because who we want to be accountable are the perpetrators of a crime, not us.
Right.
Aren't we accountable for 3 strikes that started in Washington State?
Wow.
I mean, how come it's not intervention in schools, right? First thing the Black Prisoners Caucus does in the prisons is start summits and their own education classes. Yeah. Cross race lines. One guy, Kamanti Kari, was the main person in my documentary, in our documentary, started taking education and creating history. Not changing history, creating history.
Wow.
And it came out of the Black Prisoners Caucus. And I think there's a tendency in Black people's history to say, yes, let's start with us and let's cross. Let's go cross. And as Evergreen say, speak across significant differences, right? And so in the TEACH program started by the Black Prisoners Caucus, we have a guy who's a white supremacist with swastikas all over him. But he says, I took Marco's class on El Salvador and I realized I was duped. We have a similar enemy, right? But that's the role of critical thinking in education, starting with who you are and moving across to meet someone else. Like Martin Luther King said, by the time you eat breakfast in the morning, you would have participated with more than half the world's population. So why are we doing this? Those kinds of things. And who needs to be accountable? And so when Tanya said that, she was speaking to the role of gentrification.
And Tanya's story was so interesting because from what I recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, from what I recall, she had served 17 years, came back to Hilltop and completely different. It was as if she was pressing pause and then pressing play.
Well stated.
Thank you. And the community was super different. I mean, again, elaborating on environment and structural codes and the development of an environment. We have gentrification and displacement. I've come up in a gentrified neighborhood that was historically black, which is the Central District of Seattle.
Right.
How do we discuss this in classrooms where we can actually see the progress of future urban design planners and promoting that BIPOC urban design planners who want to see their history and culture, right, when it's taught from a lens that's inclusive? Well stated. And also wanting to be a part of this community that they no longer resonate with because everything has changed.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I remember when I came to Seattle from Detroit, Michigan, I was going to University of Washington Graduate School.
Go Huskies.
Yeah. Go Ducks too. But and I remember the number 48 bus would not go all the way to University of Washington. Wow. There was an assumption. And people said, well, we didn't realize that. Well, then that's a problem too.
Well, that's because of redlining, right? And those who don't know, redlining was racially restricted covenants, where literally lines were mapped in about where Black people could live, and they were restricted. They could only get loans in this area. That's right. And we see the residue of that with gentrification. I mean, there was a part where someone in the Black Collective had mentioned taking the little that Blacks have had, and really communities of colors as well, but specifically for Black people, taking the little, using the example of a pig or a hog,
right,
making chitlins.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
taking the little
make
you
a
have.
way out of no way,
Make a
right?
way out of
Yeah,
no way.
right.
And that was the communities that have been developed. This is in areas spanning across the country, from Seattle, Tacoma to Harlem, New York, Southeast DC, right? But we're seeing that residue, and how do we, which I hear us saying but not actually stating, how do we meet people where they're at?
Right.
How do we center community?
Right, exactly. And the role of education in that, I mean, to think about it, I think about the model of the Black Prisoners Caucus Teach program. They have the students in the classroom, and it's taught by prisoners teaching prisoners, research their own biography. Just think we took that model to our public school.
Wow.
Do ethnographic research. Research where you live and what it has been. Research it through newspaper. Research it through, oral history with your grandparents, the oldest person in your family. Do those kinds of things so you can realize where you stand, how you stand, and how where you stand was somewhat constructed. So if we, and so, like we will develop urban planners possibly with a consciousness, a beautiful consciousness to pay attention. I'm not saying it's intentional, like what they wanted to get rid of, but it was. James Baldwin says it's not like, they don't want to do it. Sometimes it's the ignorance that constitutes the crime.
I love these quotes, by the way. I'm like, can we get a book of them? Everyone should get like a list of these amazing